I want to talk about my very favorite artist of all time, and that is Memphis Minnie. I discovered Minnie when I was 16 years old, and I was already, at that time, going to be a blues guitar player. I was from Canada. I was in Ottawa. I was 16. I was a high school student. I had no idea how I was ever going to be a blues man, right? Because all I knew about were blues men. I was studying B.B. King, Freddie King, Albert King, Muddy Waters, Robert Johnson, and I loved them all, and T-Bone Walker, and I would spend, all my money and all my time studying records from all these great legends. And then one day I went into my local record store, the one record store in Ottawa that had blues records, and I found a record with a woman on the cover, a woman holding a guitar. And it was, a sepia tone picture. I still have the album, and it was Memphis Minnie. And I just, my whole heart and soul lit up. I ran home with that record, and I dropped the needle on it, and I've never been the same since. Because, besides influences, it's important to have people that you relate to that are like you. So the fact that she was a woman playing guitar really made a huge impact on me. And I realized that, there'd been somebody who kind of paved the way and knew the way and was playing guitar. Memphis Minnie was a badass guitar player back in the 1930s. She was out touring around. She was writing songs. She was a complete anomaly, a self-formed human being. There was nobody like her, certainly nobody at that time. So in blues and in blues guitar, and specifically in women in blues guitar, she was the first. The first who really, got notoriety. She was recording songs and touring with her husbands and doing shows and was on the road. So a lot of people have preceded her, and there was other women who were playing sort of at the same time, but Minnie actually had a pretty high profile. So she's really important. She moved, from Mississippi to Memphis, and then Memphis to Chicago, and the style of blues that she played really evolved over time. So she traveled around with her husbands. Her first husband was Joe McCoy. And her second husband was Little Son Joe, also known as Ernest Lawlers. And she wrote a lot of songs with both her husbands. And when you hear her early stuff, it's kind of raw, and it harkens back to really early blues. She played in open tunings sometimes and open D. But the cool thing about it was more structured blues. So when you listen to early country blues, a lot of times, it's open tuning and it's kind of raw, and sometimes it's not exactly a 12-bar form. It's a little more open, and that stuff is beautiful. But when you hear Minnie's stuff, it's very organized music. It kind of harkens more to something like a Robert Johnson when you were really hearing things in an organized fashion. It's real, like, structured 12-bar forms. And you can hear structured turnarounds. You would just hear like something like, a turnaround like. So, it was very structured turnarounds, and early on it was more, you can really hear a lot of percussive style in her thing. Like you would hear like two guitars working together, which was also really interesting, and how it evolved into, really what's now just modern Chicago blues. But early on, her early stuff, you can really hear like one guitar would be like, really hammering out a real solid rhythm, and then the other guitar would be painting on top of that with patterns and turnarounds. And usually what you would hear is which was also really cool, and it is something interesting to note, is that the turnaround, a lot of times they would pick a turnaround, and it would be one turnaround for the whole song. So that would sort of, it solidifies the song, it sort of grounds the song, and it makes the song sound unique rather than switching turnarounds at every, because there's a million turnarounds you could play at the end of a measure, you could, something like that, or you can go, or you can go, or you can go. It's endless. You can make up turnarounds. But what's cool, a lot of times when I noticed with her songs, is they really tried to, kind of ground each song and keep them organized. It was organized, and it was well thought out. So these are things, when people are in the studio and they're actually really considering their music. It's not just rough and random, let's say. So it's good sometimes when you're thinking of a blues song and thinking, oh, I know all these turnarounds, and playing a different one after every measure. Well, if you play the same one after each measure, then your song starts to sound like it has some continuity. So that's something I noticed about Minnie's work with her husbands, is they really organized their songs, and they really thought about their songs. The lyrics were great. So many of the lyrics are about her. She had a fascinating life, obviously, as a woman on the road in the 30s and the 40s, trying to be a blues musician, hanging out with all these guys, and in a time when, women didn't even have rights per se, but a black woman had a lot less rights, so it couldn't have been anything but rough most of the time. But she really, and her songs run the gamut from sort of heartbreaking to real exaltation and joy, the joy of being on the road and the joy of being free. And she certainly chose a life of freedom and her own life, a unique life. So anyway, they played in a lot of different keys. They experimented. Like I said, she sometimes used open tunings. A lot of times the two guitars, you don't know who's who, but both guitars play lead, so Minnie was a lead guitar player. She could pick, she could strum, and she was known to go to battle with other guitar players, so she was into it. She was dedicated. And, but if you just wanted to do an example of what they do, you would just have to listen to, the two guitar parts. One guitar would be underneath playing sort of a solid rhythm, sometimes just something really simple like this, like in the key of E, something that would really give a real foundation. And then the other guitar on top would be playing, stuff like that, usually based around seventh chords and minor scales and stuff like that. But like I said, it was very organized, it was very together, and over time her music evolved to be, more sort of rural and primitive to something that was much more sophisticated when she moved to Chicago. You really hear the evolution. And she is one of the first recorded electric guitar players as well. She moved to electric guitar. Her music, she played with combos after that. So she played with drums and bass and different instruments and pianos. And, but her main work is just in a duo form, and I really think that's my favorite stuff because you really hear the two guitars and how they work together. And it's a wonderful example of how two guitar parts work in blues, and that really hasn't changed from the top to the bottom, with one guitar playing patterns and runs and one guitar playing underneath and holding down a real solid rhythm. And when you have these two parts, if you're playing in tandem with another guitar player, we always call it the top and the bottom. We switch. we switch, we switch. It's a dance, and it goes unsaid when you're playing with really good players, and you're playing at a jam, or you're playing with your friends. You know, like it's time when somebody wants to take the bottom, you jump on the top, and if there's 3 guitar players, well, you find another part in the middle. So, and that dance is really established in Minnie's music. It's really fascinating. Check it out. Memphis Minnie and Little Son Joe, AKA Ernest Lawlers, or Joe McCoy, the early years. Great stuff.